Go this computer. All right, so from the beginning. So last week, well, that's not working. Give me a second here. Share screen. There we go. All right, from the beginning. All right, so last week we you could see the whole screen, right? Daniel 2?
Yes.
Perfect. Last week we talked about Daniel 2, which is that statue, right? So this statue over here, and the Bible made it very clear that each metal was just a nation, right? And we went through the nations. Babylon, known for its gold, Persia, known for its silver, Greece, known for its bronze, Rome, known for its iron, and then the New World, our world, which is the mixture of clay and iron, or cement and iron, all right? But it actually ends with God's stone kind of destroying the earthly kings and a new kingdom beginning, which is God's kingdom, which is the second coming, all right? In chapter 3, so if you remember, so Nebuchadnezzar, or Babylon, is the head of gold, right? And he liked that part of the prophecy, but he didn't like the rest of this, right? He's like, hey, I thought I was gonna live forever, kind of a thing, right? And Babylon would reign forever. So in chapter 3, he gets this really big idea. He's like, well, I'm gonna make my own statue, and it's gonna be all gold, right? That way Babylon will rule forever, right? That's kind of his idea. And in fact, he made all of Babylon worship this golden statue, which represents like him and Babylon. But Daniel's friends, he has 3 of them, refuse to bow down. The king gets super upset, and basically gives them an ultimatum. You either worship my statue, or I'm gonna put you in like a fiery furnace, right? This fire, basically, kind of thing. They refuse. They say, you know what? We believe in God. We're going to worship God, and that's all that matters. So Nebuchadnezzar throws them into the fire, and then something cool happens. And this is actually what he says. And it's really interesting how he says it. So this is from Daniel 3. And this is Nebuchadnezzar, the king, talking in verse 23. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. So remember, only 3 people were thrown in the fire, right? Daniel's 3 friends. But when they get thrown into the fire, Nebuchadnezzar sees 4 people, right? And they're just walking around in the fire. Their ropes are burnt off. And then he says this, and the form of the 4th, or the 4th person, is like the Son of God, all right? So he actually sees Jesus. So Jesus is in there with them in the fire, protects them, and they actually just walk out of the fire completely unharmed. After this story, Nebuchadnezzar starts worshiping God, all right? So he's like, hey, obviously, you know, after Daniel and the statue, and now his friends and the fire, obviously the God of Israel is the true God. So he starts worshiping God. The problem is, in those days, the emperors, so like Nebuchadnezzar, they weren't just kings. The people worship them as gods, right? So like Pharaoh was seen as God, and Caesar was kind of seen as God, and so on. And it was hard for him to give that up. Chapter 4 is all about that. Chapter 4 has a prophecy, but it's not about the future. So that's why I'm not including it in here. You guys can read it on your own. It's fairly easy to understand. But basically, the king gets this vision of a tree that's cut down, and only after a while does it regrow again. He doesn't understand that. He calls Daniel again, and Daniel basically says, you're the tree. You know, you're this mighty king, but because of your pride, because of the way you let them worship you, God is going to cut you down, and you're going to end up living like the animals. You're going to go crazy. Literally, you're going to lose your mind for a few years. You're going to eat grass like cows. Your nails are going to grow. Your hair is going to grow out. You're going to look like a wild man. And only after you repent of your sin and admit that there's only one God, and that's the God of Israel, that's only when your mind is going to come back. And that's exactly what happens. A few days or weeks later, he goes mad. he starts eating grass like an animal, and it takes a few years for him to kind of go back to God. All right. At this story, at the end of chapter 4, the king himself is actually writing part of this chapter, and he says, there is only one God, and it's the God of Israel, and he's my God, and I'm going to worship him, and all of this stuff. So he completely transforms his heart. He gives his heart to God. All right. And that's how his story ends. So that's how King Nebuchadnezzar's story ends. The problem is his grandson. In the Bible, it says his son, but that's how they did lineages back then. Everyone below him would be his son. So even the grandson is considered a son. His grandson isn't like Nebuchadnezzar. He's prideful again. He's a drunk and all this crazy stuff. The story in chapter 5 is actually the fall of Babylon. So just like Daniel prophesied, right? You're the head of gold, but then another nation is going to destroy you. That actually happens in chapter 5. So in chapter 5, the king is in Babylon. He's in his castle, and he's been surrounded by Medo-Persia, right? That second empire, who is doing everything they can to try to overthrow Babylon, except Babylon is the walls are too strong. So like I said last week, they divert the river, right? They create a secondary river. The water recedes. And it's during this night that Belshazzar, that's his name, the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, he has this huge party. He actually brings out the gold that used to be in the temple of God and uses it to get drunk and all this stuff like that. And God, kind of the hand of God appears and writes something on the wall, which basically says, you're going to die today. Babylon is going to fall today. And that same night, the soldiers marched into the city, and Babylon is done. So that head of gold is no longer an empire, and it goes into the second empire of Medo-Persia, right? So chapter 5 is just a historical thing. Chapter 6 is the last story of Daniel, all right? This is a super famous story. The king of that time, again, a new king, says, everyone's got to pray to me, kind of a thing. Daniel refuses. He still remains, praying to God. And because of that, he's thrown into the lion's den, right? He's thrown into this cave full of hungry lions. They haven't been fed for days. But he prays to God. God saves his life, and he doesn't even get scratched, kind of a thing, right? And at the end of this story, the king also says, the God of Israel is a powerful God, all right? So these are just all the stories of Daniel. Chapter 7, we go back into the prophecies, all right? And like I said last week, what Daniel is going to do, what the book does, is it repeats kind of the same prophecy over and over again. So what we studied last week was the history of the empires, right? So starting with Babylon, and then we know it's Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and so on. We're going to see the exact same thing, except using animals and a bit more detail. So we're going to learn more about these nations, so that it just gives us a bit more information. All right. Again, that layering that we talked about last week. All right. So this is where we're actually going to start. That was all kind of just an introduction into chapter 7. All right. Can someone read verse 1? Maybe Nancy, if you're okay to read.
Sure. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, did I say that right? Yes. Okay. King of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Visions of his head? Okay.
Bible talk.
Okay. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts.
All right. So Daniel has a dream this time. The first time it was Nebuchadnezzar, right? The king, the vision of the statue. This time it's Daniel getting the vision. And it's during his grandson. So during that Belshazzar, so right before the fall of Babylon, Daniel gets this vision. All right. And he's just going to tell us the main facts. All right. So he's just going to tell us what he saw. So I'll read this one here. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had an eagle and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. All right, you can automatically tell that this gets a lot weirder, right? Like the last week, super easy. It's a statue, metals, no problem. Now we're talking about a lion with wings, which loses its wings and stands up like a person, gets a heart of a man, all this weird imagery, right? We're going to explain all of that. It's actually, again, really easy as long as you know what everything means. That's the only thing that you got to understand, all right? But that's the first part of his vision. So it says that 4 animals, 4 beasts, right, came out of the sea. And this was the first one, a lion with wings. Let me keep going. And suddenly another beast, or a second, like a bear. So the first one was a lion. The second is like a bear. It was raised up on one side, so it was kind of lopsided. One side was bigger than the other, and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth.
Yeah.
And they said thus to it, arise, devour much flesh. All right. So the second animal is a bear. Looks like, I guess, a normal bear, except that it's kind of lopsided, right? One shoulder is kind of higher than the other. It has 3 ribs in its mouth, and it's told to, eat much flesh or destroy a lot, right? That's the second animal. Third animal. After this, I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. So the lion had 2 wings. This one has 4 wings. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. All right. So it starts off kind of normal. It's a leopard until you learn that it has 4 wings and it ends up having 4 heads. All right. Sounds really weird. Easy to explain. All right. The last one, verse 7. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. This 4th animal is literally just called a beast. It's not like any animal that Daniel recognizes, all right? Except that it's stronger and more terrifying than the other 3. It had huge iron teeth. That should kind of give away where we are, right? The iron, we've read about that before. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring and breaking in pieces and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. All right. So this 4th one is kind of a strange one. It just looks like a lot of times they put like a dragon or a dinosaur or some crazy animal. But it has iron teeth. It destroys a lot more than the other 3, right? It literally tramples it until the enemies become like dust. And it actually says that it's different from the other animals. And it has 10 horns, all right? So I'm going to jump over a section that we're actually going to study next week because there's a lot of detail in there, and I don't want to make tonight go too long. So next week, we'll actually read a little bit extra. It's about that 4th beast. But let me jump to 15 here. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. So when he got this dream, he got scared, all right? He didn't understand it. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all of this. So as he was having the vision, there was like angels around him. So he just went to an angel and said, listen, what did I just see? What are these animals? So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. So that's what's great about the Bible, all right? Most of the time, it explains itself, all right? So we had the vision, very strange, but now we're going to have an angel that's going to explain it, all right? Verse 17 says this, those great beasts, so those 4 animals, which are 4 kings which arise out of the earth. So again, just like the statue, they're 4 kings or 4 kingdoms, all right? But, verse 18, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. All right. So in other words, listen, there's going to be these empires, But don't be scared. At the end, God's people or God is going to become the new empire. Just like the statue. Remember, the statue had a bunch of medals, 4 of them really. And then the rock comes down and we get God's empire, right? So the angel is saying the exact same thing here. That's how you know that we're looking at like a parallel prophecy here. So let's actually look at these animals now. We'll break down why they look the way they do. It looks kind of like, I don't know, something out of a Marvel movie or something. But these are kind of an artist's rendition, right, of these 4 animals. You'll see that the last one there's like a dragon or a dinosaur or something.
Yeah.
So let's look at the first one. All right. So it says, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on the feet like 2 men, and had a man's heart. All right. So the lion with wings, for us, it sounds really strange, but everybody in the world would have recognized this as Babylon. All right. Because Babylon loved this image. All right. So if you look at the paintings here or the artwork on the walls, this is actually from Babylon. Their walls were covered in these glyphs of lions with wings. It's a little hard to see, but you can. Do you see my mouse moving around? I don't know if you can see the mouse. But that's a wing there. That's a lion with a wing. One of the most famous statues in Babylon is known as the Lion of Babylon. And even if you look last week, the gold, you'll notice that it's lions with wings, right? It's a lion with wings on it. Everybody knew that the symbol of Babylon was a lion with wings. So when Daniel gets this vision, the first one isn't an issue. He completely understands what the first one means. And we're actually going to read that next week. When Daniel says that he gets scared and confused, it's only about a certain part of the prophecy, which we actually didn't read today. These things he doesn't have a problem with. All right. So the whole thing of a lion with wings, you know how every country is kind of given an animal. So the United States is known as like the eagle, right? It uses the eagle symbol. Canada is like a moose or a goose or something.
Right.
China is the dragon. Russia is like the bear kind of a thing. Every country has like its symbol, right? Its animal symbol. And in the Bible days, it was the exact same thing. And Babylon was known as the lion with wings. All right. So that's what the lion with wings means. The wings also represent conquest or speed. So if you were actually to read through the Bible, if you go to like I don't know, BibleGateway.com, it's just a Bible online, and you can search for keywords. And if you were to type in wings, you'd get all the verses in the Bible that have the word wings in it. Most of the time, it's connected to conquest. So it's like they're going to mount up on wings and conquer the next country or whatever. So it's a symbol of like conquest and speed, right? Like the way birds can fly quickly. Except in this case, the wings are plucked off. And that's because when Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar it reached its peak, it grew very quickly, and then it kind of stalled. And that's because of Persia. Persia became kind of this adversary to Babylon, and it stopped it from growing any further. It wasn't able to conquer any other countries. And that's why it's seen as like the wings were plucked off. Just as it was growing, Babylon stalls. It kind of stops with Nebuchadnezzar. That's the interesting part. So it stopped growing with Nebuchadnezzar because of Persia. And if you remember, with the quick stories that I said, Nebuchadnezzar actually has a change of heart, right? He was a worshiper of the Babylonian gods, but then became a worshiper of God and actually became a really nice guy. You can't be a dictating, conquering king if you feel bad for people, right? And that's what happened with Nebuchadnezzar. Because he accepted God in his life, he didn't just kill people anymore. He didn't just go out and conquer other nations and stuff like that. That's what it means when it says that this lion suddenly stood up on 2 feet like a man and got a man's heart. So literally Babylon changed, right? It went from being this conquering, going out into the world and destroying everything around it, into a person with a heart, right? It doesn't want to kill anymore. It doesn't want to conquer anymore. All right. So that's the imagery that we're seeing here. Nancy, do you have a question?
Yeah, because when I look at when the people of Israel left, Egypt to
Mhm.
conquer Canaan and all that, and all the cities they had to destroy and conquer. Like, so was that evil? Because
Yeah. It's a good question. And that gets down to like a really big question a lot of people ask nowadays, because when you look at a lot of holy wars, for instance, right? They always say, God is telling us to conquer the world, or to take this country, to take that country. Um, the problem is it really God talking in the Bible? Because it's in the Bible, we assume that it's right? And when you actually read it in the Bible, it actually says, these are evil people, and if you don't destroy them, they're going to influence you, and you're going to be separated from God, right? So that's why he does that. But when you actually look at the Bible, God made it very clear. Okay, these are the borders. This is what Israel's going to be. You're not going to expand any further. It's not your thing to conquer other, beyond those borders, kind of a thing. This is what I've given you, and that's it. um and to be honest, what God said about, if you leave them alive, they're going to influence you, that's exactly what happened, because there was a few countries, or yeah, countries, I guess, that they decided not to destroy. They made deals with them. Kind of, they made some sort of a peace agreement. And it's like the worst thing they did, because it just ended up destroying the people. Because then they started worshiping their gods and intermarrying and all of this stuff. So that's probably why God said to do that in the, well, that's why he says, to do it in the Bible. Um, with Babylon, it's very different. Babylon is just about power, right? It's about, I want to rule the world, right? It's like the Hitler complex kind of a thing. I want to run the world, and so I got to conquer everybody to do that. All right. But Nebuchadnezzar stops that, right? He kind of says, well, that's not who I am anymore. So that's why it's this, this line gets a man's heart. All right. The second one is the bear, right? So suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear, it was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth, between its teeth, and they said thus, arise, devour much flesh. All right. The bear is, again, a very simple understanding. If you look at the bottom there, this is actually from Iranica online. So Persia is Iran now. So where Iran is, the nation of Iran, that is what Persia used to be, or that's where Persia used to be. It's the same area. So that's why it's Iran. But Persia is known for its bears. In fact, it has 2 different types of bears. And it's kind of the area where there was more bears in the Middle East. It's what made Persia kind of different. So you can see again another sculpture of a bear in Persian art. And so it just naturally became the image of Persia, right? So when Daniel sees the bear, again, another easy, everyone would know this. Oh, that must be Persia, right? Because that's where the bears are, that kind of a thing. The reason it has 3 ribs in its mouth, so obviously ribs is because it killed something, right? It killed an animal and took its ribs. So it's 3 ribs, and that's because Persia conquered 3 main empires. Babylon, which we read about, right? The fall of Babylon. Lydia, which was not as powerful as Babylon, but a big empire, and Egypt, which was a big empire. So for Medo-Persia to become that worldwide empire kind of a thing, it did it by destroying 3 equally large empires: Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt. That's why the bear has 3 ribs. All right. So you just have to know a bit of history, and it makes sense. And in this one, there actually isn't anything too strange, except for the fact, if you'll remember, the bear's lopsided, right? So the bear's bigger on one side than the other. That's because Persia was actually 2 countries. Medo-Persia, Media, the Empire of Media, and the Empire of Persia. Media is actually the original empire. So the one that rose up first was Media, but it quickly joined up with Persia, except when it did that, Persia became the stronger side. And so even though it's a kind of like a joint empire, really it was Persia, which is why in the beginning it's called Medo-Persia. But after a while, it just ends up being Persia because the Media, just gained less and less power or influence. That's why it's a bear that's lopsided. It's two nations, but one is stronger than the other. One is more prevalent than the other one is. The next prophecy we're going to read, it's literally going to tell us that. It's going to tell us that it's two and one is stronger. But it's already giving us that hint, all right? You can see how there's a lot more detail than the statue, right? With the statue, it was just, metals. Here we're getting details. So the next empire is going to be Persia, and it's going to become the empire by destroying three empires, right? Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt. So it's just something that you can learn and expand on. And again, this is important because when we get to the third or fourth retelling, when we actually introduce Jesus into the story, because it's actually going to tell us exactly some time frames of Jesus, you need all of these details for it to make sense, all right? So that's why it's kind of like God's taking like baby steps with us. Very simple, and then a little bit more complicated, and then a little bit more complicated, and so on, all right? But that's Medo-Persia. We get to the third one, which is Greece. And for Greece, it says, after this, I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. All right. So there's the image of it. Greece, again, when you look at Greek artwork, I just put a few examples here, but it's tons of it. You get the leopard idea all over the place. They love the image of leopards. I don't know why, but that's just an animal that they chose to highlight, kind of a thing. So it's very possible that even the leopard Daniel would have understood. Greece wasn't quite as big as, it's when it was an empire during Daniel's day, but it was growing. It was already a fairly large country at this point. Give me a second. Someone's trying to get in. Sorry, my wife just got home. But yeah, so leopards, you find it all over it. It's in their mythologies, it's in their artwork, and so on. So leopard just becomes the image, the animal of Greece. Oddly enough, if you go to Google and you type in Greece and leopard, it'll actually show their tanks, because that's the main tanks that they use now. It's called the leopard tank. So again, it just shows that they like leopards. I don't know. That's the animal that they chose. It had 4 wings because it was exceedingly conquering driven and exceedingly fast. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, if you don't know the history of Alexander. It's with, I can't remember the actor now. I know Angelina Jolie's in it as well. But it's kind of the history of Alexander the Great, right? How Greece became an empire. And Alexander the Great, he conquered the known world in his day before he was 30 years old. I mean, the speed at which he conquered the world is unmatched to this day. No one in history has been able to do what Alexander the Great did in his lifetime. In fact, Alexander the Great was so passionate about conquering that when he did turn 30, and he had gone as far as like the edges of India and parts of Africa, the whole known world kind of at the time, he got super depressed because he had nothing else to conquer. Like he had nowhere else to defeat, and he started drinking heavily. History isn't 100% sure on this. there's two ideas. Either he was poisoned by putting poison in the alcohol, or he died of alcohol poisoning. We're not exactly sure, but we do know that he was drinking heavily when he got very sick, and he had four generals. All right, so the four generals, knowing that he was going to die, and this is why some people think that maybe they poisoned him, but knowing that he was going to die, the four generals went to Alexander, and this is recorded in history, and they asked him, listen, when you're gone, who's going to take your place? Which one of us, which one of the four is going to become the emperor? And his answer is whoever's the strongest. Or in other words, you're going to have to fight for it. And in fact, they didn't end up doing that. They had some skirmishes. But what happened with Greece, so Greece starts off as one big empire. When Alexander the Great died, the four generals divided Greece into four countries, all right? Which I have here, if you look at the bottom. So the first one is the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in the east, the Kingdom of Pergamum in Asia Minor, and Macedon, or Macedonia. So Greece got divided into four nations. That is why the leopard ends up having four heads, right? And it says that dominion was given to it. So in other words, the body is like Alexander the Great. So it's one person. One person created the empire, but then when he died, it was simply divided or given to, the dominions were given to these four heads, all right? These four kings, or, well, they started off as generals, but they became four kings. So that's why the leopard has four heads, all right? So again, it looks weird when you see it, but it's just giving us a bit of history. It's just saying that we're going to have Greece, this big empire, but then it's going to be divided into four heads, four generals, four kings. All right. The last one is the most complex, and that's why it says that this beast is different from the other ones. All right. So if you look at the image, it looks pretty scary. Looks like some, I don't know, dragon or devil or something. But so let me read it again, what it says here. After this, in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast. So a fourth empire. We know it's an empire. We've had Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece. So we know it's Rome. That's not the hard part. So the fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. And that's what history shows us. Rome pushed the borders of the empire further than anyone in history. All right. Rome became this superpower, right? That to this day, we have influences of Rome. Most governments in the world are based on Roman governments, right? The Republic and so on. Roman architecture. You look at the White House. It's all based on Roman architecture, right? The pillars and all of that stuff. Hitler. You know how it's called the Third Reich? That's because Hitler wanted to recreate the Empire of Rome. His title, which is German, but it's just German for Caesar. Like he was trying to recreate Rome, except in Germany, right? To conquer the world. But Rome has been such a huge influence to this day, because it was just exceedingly powerful. All right. It had huge iron teeth, which will take us, Rome was the iron legs, right? If you remember that. And if you remember, the statue has two legs, right? So two iron legs. Rome actually has two parts. There's two time periods of Rome. There's the Rome of the Caesars, right? Which is the empirical Rome. And then there's the Holy Roman Empire, which is Rome under the Pope or under the Roman Catholic Church. They're both Roman empires, except it's like two stages of Rome. All right. There's the secular Caesar version of Rome, and then it transitioned into a religious Holy Rome, right? Which then, again, same thing, conquering the world. So it was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. And then it was different from all the beasts. That's going to be explained next week. All right. I've given you some hints now in terms of the idea that it's actually two empires. But next week, we're going to read the verses that we didn't read today, and it'll make it very clear as to why this empire is different than the previous three. All right. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. All right. Horns in the Bible always means nations. All right. So the fact that it has 10 horns tells us that just like the leopard then becomes four heads, so one empire becomes four empires. When Rome finally got broken up by the barbarians, the barbarian invasions, if you know history, it got broken up into four barbarian tribes. All right, so Rome got divided into 10, the same way the leopard or Greece got divided into four. Rome got divided into 10. All right. And in fact, I have a map of Rome here. Now, again, it's not the Rome that we're used to today, right? Rome now is a city, right? A city country. It's kind of weird. But the empire of Rome conquered all of Europe, the northern part of Africa, and also the Middle East. That whole area was part of the Roman Empire. So that when the Roman Empire got destroyed, got broken up, the different barbarian tribes that lived in all of that area gained dominion. So you can see the map here, right? You can see how you can see Europe, Northern Africa, Middle East kind of there in the corner. And each color is a different tribe, all right? And the graph beside it is actually the barbarian tribe. So you have the Alemanni, which is the yellow part here, which is what then becomes Germany. You have Anglo-Saxons, which I'm sure you've heard of before. That's the, England, the English. The Burgundians, which becomes the Swiss. The Lombards, which is still a famous last name in Italy, but those are the Italians. The Suevi become the Portuguese. The Franks obviously become the French. The Visigoths became Spain, the Spanish. And then there's three other ones, the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. These tribes no longer exist. They were wiped off the face of the earth, all right? Through wars and amalgamations and stuff. They no longer exist, these three tribes. That is really important for next week, all right? Because next week, what we're going to learn is that even though it starts off with 10 horns, this animal power, this beast power, Rome, an 11th horn pops up. So an 11th empire or country is born, and it actually knocks out three of the previous horns. So Daniel, like 1,000 years before it happened, already knew that Rome would be divided into these 10 nations, but that three of the nations would be destroyed. And that's like 1,000 years before it happened. It's pretty crazy when you actually take what Daniel is going to be told, because we haven't even read that yet, right? We've read about the animals and that's it. Next week, we're going to learn about the 11th horn, and it's going to give us a lot more detail. It's during this 11th horn that Daniel gets really afraid, all right? That Daniel gets very kind of upset with what he's seeing. And that's why, because it's a whole other thing, I'm going to leave that for next week, all right? But can you see the parallels? So you had a statue of gold, silver, bronze, and then iron. And then the iron gets mixed with clay and you get 10 toes. Well, here you have four animals. So the gold is the lion with wings. The silver is the bear with the three ribs. The bronze is the leopard with four heads. And the iron is the beast with iron teeth. And then the 10 toes are the same as the 10 horns, all right? Or similar to that, all right? So it's when Rome gets divided into 10, that leads us into the day that we have now. So modern Europe and the world and so on. All right. But next week we'll get a lot more detailed in terms of these 10 horns and then the other horn. Any questions at all? You can see how this gets a little bit more complicated, right? Last week, very simple.
Mhm.
This week, I don't think it's complicated, but you can see how there's a lot more little details being told, right? But do you guys understand it? Did it make sense at all? Or any questions that you guys have?
No,
Okay.
you explain it. You explain it very well.
All right.
I have
What-
a question about those three that were extinct.
Yeah, so the three that were
No, you
thrown
have
out. Yep.
German, we know Germans, we know the language of each of these things, German, English, Swiss, Italian, Portuguese, French, Spanish. What language did the other one speak? Was that caveman stuff? You know what I mean? Like,
No, so I believe the Vandals, I believe it's the Vandals. Let me check here. Okay, no, the Heruli. The Heruli were also Italians, all right? But it was two different tribes of Italians. The Heruli, I believe, were more of southern Italy, and the Lombards were more from the north. And the southern ones were just kind of wiped out, all right? Either through wars or amalgamations. Their tribe was kind of disintegrated. The Vandals were actually the northern Africa. Those were destroyed during like the Moorish invasions, the Muslims, things like that. So as the Moors came up, it's crazy, but it was a European tribe that actually invaded Africa, but then were defeated themselves. All right, so the Vandals were destroyed, and then the third one are the Ostrogoths, which are, I think, moving towards Turkey. So a Turkish thing, which again, because of the Muslim invasions, Turkey became Muslim, right? And that tribe was also destroyed within history. So they could have spoken languages that were given. It's not like they were a completely different, language or anything like that, but they were their own distinct tribe, if that makes sense.
makes sense.
All right. So again, we're just taking some baby steps here. Next week is going to be really good because, up until now, I've been telling you that the second empire is Medo-Persia and that the third one is Greece. The next vision that Daniel is going to get, he's actually going to be told, listen, this is Medo-Persia and this is Greece. So the first three empires, there is zero guessing needed. The Bible itself will tell us the first three empires. And then you just need history to know the rest, all right? But again, in the next prophecy, more detail is going to be given, especially on what we're going to study next week, which is that little horn, this other horn that pops up on this beast power. It's really going to zoom in on that. Because again, that's really where Daniel is having his issues, all right? And we're going to understand why next week. Yeah, I'll leave it for next week, just to not complicate things.
What was the secular Rome related, like secular and holy? What is that?
Okay, so let's take Rome. So before Rome became an empire, Rome had a republic, right? Which means it had senators, and people would vote, and they had that whole assembly, right? I don't know how much you know about Roman history. So they had these senators. Each one had a district, very similar to like the United States. All right, it was very much done like the United States. Then you got this general called Julius Caesar. All right, who was an amazing general. He was conquering Europe. And as he conquered Europe, he made massive amount of gold, all right? So he became super rich to the point where he started thinking, you know what? We really don't need these senators. I think I'm just going to become king because Rome didn't have a king, right? They were a republic. It was all about voting and things like that. But Julius Caesar comes in literally marches into Rome with his armies, which were Roman armies, but because he was the one paying them, they followed him. He marched into Rome, walked up the steps of the Senate and said, I am now your emperor. And the republic kind of ended and he became Caesar, right? He became king of Rome, kind of a thing. And then within his family, you know, his son became king, and then on and on. And you got really famous guys like Nero, right? Which was kind of crazy, burns down half of Rome and things like that. But as the Caesars go generation after generation, they kind of get crazier and crazier, more sinful. I mean, there's whole stories of like orgies and just crazy things that they do, intermarrying, all of these weird things. And they slowly kind of lose control. Rome was destroyed from the inside. It wasn't conquered from the outside. The problem is the Rome of the Caesars became so corrupt, so focused on like the luxuries, right? Eating and drinking and parties and all of this stuff, that it literally just disintegrated from the inside out. It just became corrupt, until until it reached the point that the people just got upset and they're like, listen, we're not going to do this anymore. And when the barbarian tribes kind of invaded, the people refused to help the Caesar, and so then Rome falls, kind of. What actually ends up happening is Constantine, who's one of the last Caesars, he realizes that Rome is going to fall. So what does he do? He moves his capital from Rome to Turkey, which he renames Constantinople after himself, right? Constantinople. So that's when you start getting Eastern Empire and Western Empire. It's kind of an iffy thing. But basically what he did is when he transferred the Caesar's power to Constantinople, he gave the kingship of Rome to the Pope. So he's like, hey, you're not just a religious leader anymore. Now you're also king of Rome. So that's why Rome then becomes the Holy Roman Empire. It's a holy empire now, because now it's being run by the Pope, right? By the Catholic Church. And you get this split. But what's amazing is the Holy Roman Empire ends up getting even more power and more kind of reach, to the point that it's reaching as far as the Americas, Asia, Africa, all of, and it becomes this worldwide power. But we're going to get more into that next week. All right. That's that little extra horn that pops out of nowhere, but we'll get into it.
Is there something we can watch to understand Rome better? It looks like I know parts of this history, but
yeah, let me look around. I'll see if I can find something. I'll give kind of like a concise history of how Rome worked. I'll see if there must be something on YouTube. Yeah, if I find it, I'll send you the link and you can share it. All right.
Sure.
Perfect.
And then there was a belly and thighs you were going to expand on. Was it belly and thighs? And did I miss that?
Oh, right. There was something I was going to share, right? Do you remember what it is?
Nope.
I remember.
Wait, so you said belly and thighs. Keep that on your mind for next week. So I have it empty here.
It'll come up to me afterwards.
You were saying the head, the arms, 2 arms. The Persian Empire is a joined empire.
Yeah.
Persia and the Medes, and then you move down to the belly and thighs, and there was something. What material was that made of?
That's bronze. So that's the Greek Empire.
That's Greece. Sparkles like gold. Sparkles like gold. But there was something with that. Maybe you'll remember it for next time.
Yeah, if I remember it, I'll send out the message. Yeah, if I don't write it down, I forget everything.
Okay, I should have put more detail on that one.
Yeah. All right. But again, next week it's going to be fairly similar. With one, well, not next week. Next week we're still going to be doing chapter 7. The week after we're going to be doing the third prophecy, which will dig us even deeper into kind of what's going on.
So today with all these beasts, we've covered the entire statue.
Yep.
Okay, so the 10 toes are the 10 nations.
Are the 10 horns. Yeah. So that's what we're going to focus on next week. So next week, we're going to zoom into the ending part of history, which is closer to our time. So it's kind of nice. We'll get a little bit closer to kind of what we're going through and so on. But really, when it talks about like our time, you have to get into Revelation. So I mean, we're doing Daniel so that we can understand Revelation when we get to it. Because again, you need Daniel to understand Revelation. So it just takes us a little time to actually get there. All right. That's why, again, we're talking about these ancient empires, right? Babylon, Rome, those things are all in the past. But we kind of need to understand the imagery that we have here, because when we get into Revelation, it's using the same imagery. We're going to see that, in fact, the same 4 animals are going to pop up in Revelation, but then move into our time period, literal, including like the United States and stuff. So that'll be cool. All right. So let me just wrap it up here, and I'll stop recording. Let me see, stop share, and I'll stop.